Singularity by William Seator, 2. Getting to Sushan was complicated. From Chicago, we were to take a little commuter airline to a place called Champaign, and from there a long ride on a local bus to Sushan. Travel always made me nervous, which Barry thought was stupid of me. And then there was Fred, who considered the whole experience an incomprehensible horror show. Fred was our dog, part Cocker Spaniel, part mutt. He would enjoy being in the country, and he could also act as a watchdog for us, Mom believed. Barry and I knew that Fred was more afraid of night noises than we were, but it would be fun to have him around, and he'd be good company for me if Barry went off into one of his moods. Except that it was me who had to lug Fred, whimpering in his little carrier box, through the endless miles of O'Hare Airport. We finally reached the Wabash Airlines gate. Shortly before the plane took off, I was relieved for about 1 minute. Then I saw the plane. It was a tiny prop job, smaller than the average station wagon, with barely enough room inside for 8 cramped seats. To the other passengers, plump, pink-faced, and crew-cut, it all seemed routine, but I was horribly uncomfortable as we strapped ourselves in, and Fred, in my lap, was very noisily beside himself. I tried to quiet him down, but once we started moving, it didn't matter anymore. The contraption bounced down the runway like a defective toy, its gasping engine making more noise than 4 jets ever did. We dipped alarmingly as the plane struggled into the sky, the floor and window panes buzzing like crazy. The lurching and rolling stopped when we reached our cruising altitude of about 100 feet, though the noisy rattling did not, and Fred kept moaning. Barry was sitting across the aisle from me, but he was so close that he leaned over easily to scream in my ear, "Can't you make that stupid animal shut up?" "I'm doing the best I can," I screamed back. "Calm down," Barry said with contempt. "We're not going over any mountains." An understatement. The landscape below us was so amazingly flat that it formed a natural checkerboard. The roads met at right angles and stretched rigidly across the countryside, without curve or dip. It was as though no one had realized that there was any angle but 90 degrees, or any shape but a rectangle. The pattern was broken only by the isolated farmhouses and the curves of their trees. The frail, cigar-shaped shadow of the plane rippled over the textured squares of brown and green. From the air, the landscape was too grandly surreal to be monotonous, but no grandeur was evident from the windows of the bus, only endless rows of tall corn whizzing by, and the sing-song dip and rise of telephone wires. The sheer numbing bleakness of it depressed me, so different from the rolling and populous east. The passengers on the bus were even plumper and pinker than their airborne counterparts. I nudged Barry and then grimaced at the placid faces around us, hoping to reestablish closeness by sharing our superiority to all these others. We were from the cultured, sophisticated, historical part of the country, after all, but Barry barely acknowledged my look. He was still irritated by my childish behavior on the plane. Fred's cage was in my lap. He was more used to buses, and I bent down so he could lick my face, which helped a little to make up for Barry's unjust coldness. Reading on buses makes me carsick, so I looked out the window, tried to content myself with the cornfields, and listened to my portable tape player. I wondered each time we passed the farmhouse if that was what Uncle Ambrose's house would be like. "Sushan!" the bus driver finally called out. We struggled from the bus with Fred and our suitcases and stepped out into the center of town. It was 1 block long. There were a couple of old brick buildings with flat facades and some white frame houses. Nothing was more than 2 stories high. The place looked dead, except for the dairy bar down at the end of the block. To our right, there were 6 cars in its gravel parking lot, and a group of men in big hats slouching beside them. "Thank God we didn't get here during rush hour," Barry said. We were standing in front of one of the brick buildings. Deluxe Cafe was written over the doorway in unlit neon, and a cardboard sign in the dusty window advertised catfish sandwiches. The weeds that had broken through the cement sidewalk were as tall as my waist. There wasn't even a rustle of wind in the towering old trees that lined the street. The only sound was the hum of the departing bus. It remained visible on the straight road, getting smaller and smaller, trembling in the waves of heat from the pavement. Suddenly, I felt deserted, lonely. I looked at Barry and shrugged. He quickly turned away. "No sign of that lawyer guy," he said. The lawyer had agreed over the phone to meet us and drive us to the house, explaining that it would be simpler than trying to find a cab. The toy-sized bus was the only moving object to the right. To the left, a railroad track cut across the road at the end of the block. On the other side was a row of peculiar white cylindrical structures several stories taller than the brick buildings, and beyond them, cornfields. The road was empty in that direction. "Maybe there's a payphone in this place," Barry said, peering through the window of the deluxe cafe. "It looks closed," I said. "I wonder if we should let Fred out. He must have to go something fierce." "Don't. He'll just look. Maybe that's the lawyer." A long, shiny, dark blue car pulled up from the middle of the intersection that a gravel road crossed the highway at right angles. A little street sign, partially hidden by an ear of corn, said 1800 North. "This is a blind corner," I said, my heart pounding. "There should be a stop sign." Only blind at this time of year," Mr. Crane said. "Usually you can see anything coming along the road for miles, but not when the corn's high. It grows so fast it makes the road difficult." I think I skipped a page. And I did. So let's try that again. A long, shiny, dark blue car pulled out from the other side of the dairy bar. It rolled over and stopped right in front of us. A middle-aged man in a business suit and sunglasses climbed out and closed the door, leaving the motor running. "Afternoon! You the Krasner boys?" "Yeah, we started to say together. Barry shot me a look and I closed my mouth. "Yeah, that's us," Barry said. The lawyer pulled off his glasses and looked curiously back and forth between us. His lips paused and he shook his head. "Twins, huh? Geez, you gotta be. You two could be one kid holding a mirror. Never seen two separate people look so much alike." "I'm Barry Krasner and this is my brother Harry," Barry said, extending his hand with an impatient gesture. Barry hated being a twin. I felt that every time someone mentioned our resemblance or called him by my name. To Barry, all my little flaws, and who doesn't have flaws, were magnified and reflected back at him. When he looked at me, it was as though he were looking into a nasty, distorting mirror, and he was struck with that mirror. And he was stuck with that mirror. It would always be with him. Even when we grew up and moved away from one another, even if we never saw each other, he would always know that I existed somewhere, a living reminder of everything he hated about himself and couldn't change. Sometimes I even thought Barry wanted me to die. What other escape from me was there? "I bet even your own mother doesn't know one of you from the other," the lawyer went on, ignoring Barry's extended hand, still impressed with our resemblance. "I bet she can't tell which is which." "Mr. Crane," Barry said, almost in a tone of reprimand, and grabbed his hand urgently and pumped it. "That's me," the lawyer said. Shook hands with me. The lawyer shook hands with me. "Well, might's well get going," he said, tearing his eyes away from us to glance at his watch. "Hope you two got the keys I sent." "I have them," Barry said. Barry took the front seat, and I got him back with Fred in the suitcases. The car was roomy and air-conditioned. Even so, we could feel the sudden burst of heat as we left the shady main street and bumped across the tracks. The town's kind of like an oasis in the middle of all these fields," Barry said. "Cool because of the trees, I mean." "Oasis? You mean like in a desert?" Mr. Crane shook his head. "You got it all wrong. This is the prairie." He spoke the word as though there was something amazing and beautiful about all this flatness, as though it were a mountain range or an ocean. "Desert? Why, the Illinois prairie is the most fertile land in the world. Nothing grows anywhere like it does here. Look at this corn. It's just turned August, and already it's so tall you can't—" I lurched against the front seat as Mr. Crane slammed on the brakes. We stopped about a foot from an old truck that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere and was rattling serenely across the highway in a cloud of dust. We could see, now in the middle of the intersection, that a gravel road crossed the highway at right angles. A little street sign, partially hidden by an ear of corn, said 1800 North. "This is a blind corner," I said, my heart pounding. "There should be a stop sign." "Only blind this time of year," Mr. Crane said. "Usually you can see anything coming along that road for miles, but not when the corn's high. It grows so fast it makes the road different. Gotta be careful. The corn always causes a lot of accidents this time of year." Killer corn, huh? Barry said wryly. Yeah, you might say that, Mr. Crane said. Sorry for the jolt. He wiped a hand across his forehead, and the car moved forward again. Only a mile or so down the highway, we were turned off onto another gravel road, labeled 1500 North. We headed toward a line of trees, the first trees we'd seen since leaving the town. The road sloped downward and actually began to curve. Now there were dense banks of purple wildflowers along the road. We crossed a little concrete bridge, and 100 yards later, a little metal bridge, and after another 100 yards, a third bridge. So many streams, all so close together, Barry murmured, looking out the window to catch a glimpse of the water. It's all the same one, the Salt Fork River. Winds around a lot, that's all, almost there. We could see sections on the right of a falling apart wooden fence almost completely buried under thick foliage. We turned into a rutted dirt road. Leaves and branches scraped against the car as we passed through an opening in a high brambly hedge. Can't stop trimming this stuff for a week even, Mr. Crane murmured. Past the hedge, the two tracks of the road faced out of existence into a weedy, overgrown meadow before they even reached the house. Could be a nice place, right on the river and all, if somebody'd put some money into it, said Mr. Crane, and he reached for the ignition. We stepped out of the car as the motor died. It wasn't silent here. The meadow buzzed with insect sounds. Though they came from all sides, the individual whining voices rose and fell together in the same unvarying rhythm, as though all the thousands of them were following the beat of one conductor. The wooden house had been white once, the roof was green. There was a long front porch and a round bay at one end of it that rose to become a sort of tower with a conical roof. Intricate but neglected wooden gingerbread carvings curled along the porch roof and around the variously shaped windows and the steep sloping eaves. The house at first gave the impression of being quite large. Then you realized that it was small, just very complicated. There was about 40 feet of meadow between the house and the row of trees behind it. The same trees we had been traveling toward since we left the main road. It was late afternoon now, and the tree shadows had almost reached the house. If you listened closely, you could hear, underneath the grating insects, the cool splashing of water over stones. Barry was staring around with his chin lifted and his mouth half open, his hands clenched by his sides. If Mr. Crane hadn't been there, Barry would have been hooting and jumping up and down like a little kid. He was in love with the place already. I could sense it as clearly as I could hear the insects. Hey, isn't this wonderful? I just love it, I said, wanting to be included in his excitement. I didn't say anything about how run down the place was or how isolated. We hadn't passed another house since leaving town. It was already dark under those trees. Would the phone be working? What about the electricity? Here we are, Fred, I said as brightly as I could. I pulled his cage out of the car and opened it up. He tore out of it, hopped wildly around me, barking, then suddenly stopped, sniffed the air, and took off, his long ears flying behind him. In seconds, he was hidden by the tall meadow grasses. Cute dog, Mr. Crane cleared his throat. Hope nothing happens to him. What? Barry turned back to him, taking his eyes from the house for the first time since we'd stepped out of the car. What did you say? Time for me to get going, said Mr. Crane. He looked at his watch. You boys okay now? Got the keys and all? We're fine, Barry said enthusiastically, no longer able to keep from grinning. We're going to have a great time. Well, I made sure the food was delivered, like your folks asked, he said, pulling open the car door. Nice to meet you. Thanks a lot, we both told him. We'll be fine, Barry insisted. He was so eager for Mr. Crane to leave that he looked like he had to pee. He turned back to the house, reaching into his pocket for the keys. I leaned into the front window of the car as Mr. Crane started the motor. Can we call you if we need to? I asked him softly so Barry wouldn't hear. Sure. He turned the car around and headed back to the road. As the motor faded, I wondered how long it would be before we heard that sound again. I turned back to the house. Barry was at the front door. He was going to go in without even waiting for me. Hey, wait a minute, I called as I ran toward him, hoping he'd hear me over the insects. I almost tripped on the porch steps, which were partially hidden by weeds. Harry, did you ever see any place as great as this? The river and the meadow and everything, and this crazy old house. It's all ours for the next 2 weeks. It's like, I don't know what it's like. Like a dream, I said cornily, watching Barry try the keys in the front door. It occurred to me that Uncle Ambrose might have been dead for a long time before anyone found him, and what condition had he been in there? Had he been in then? "This is the one," Barry said as the third key slid smoothly into the lock. He gave it a couple of twists. The lock clicked. He pushed open the door. And that's the end of Chapter 2.